record on this computer. I've only done it once. And we both panicked. And then that was that. Okay, so I will send you a recording afterwards. I host it in my YouTube, but I host it where only you can see it, if that makes sense. So don't freak out when I send you a YouTube link and think, oh my God, this is on YouTube. So can I just do a little bit of housekeeping with you before we start speaking?
Yeah.
Is that okay? So I'll record this for you. You can ask anything you want to today. We can cover any topics and we'll talk about that in just a second. I won't share this with anyone else, the exception being that if you share anything with me that I think puts a young person or a vulnerable adult in immediate danger, my safeguarding trigger is to speak to Kate, who is my, you know, Kate, but she's like my safeguarding lead for EOTAS matters. It's never happened, but that would be the only time that I would ever do anything without speaking to you first. If I ever have any conversations with anyone that like is like, oh, I've got a client who, it would always be anonymized. Is that okay? Oh, I've lost you already. I lost you.
Oh, we both said yes, that's great.
Okay, perfect. Good. And the conversation we're having today is on the basis that you understand that I'm not a trained solicitor, nor am I a clinical professional. I'm a trauma-informed, accredited expert by experience. So whatever that means. I think the best kind, but not everyone agrees with me. Yeah, so I don't always make notes. Sometimes I do, but today my brain seems to be on it. So I probably won't make any notes, but if I did, I would destroy them afterwards. So you were saying, does that sound all okay?
That all sounds great.
Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you.
So you were saying you found the sessions helpful. Have you had any conversations about what you would like to get out of our time together? We've got an hour together. You have?
Yes.
Okay. Amazing.
We have a really specific topic.
Brilliant.
Because we've got a meeting with the SEND team about an EHCP tomorrow.
Brill.
And we're a bit lost.
Well,
okay.
Hang on a second. We've been sent a draft EHCP. So we were turned down initially. We appealed.
Yeah.
On the last day, you know, the standard pattern you must see all the time. The last day of the appeal, they say we will assess. Then it took months. Then we had the educational psychologist visit. He was very good. He said my report will ensure that an EHCP is awarded. Mm-hmm. And where we're at is Orly, our child, is 16, has left their school that only goes to 16, which they haven't attended.
Well, they haven't attended
for 2 years.
2 years.
So they're currently stateless. So they're not attached to any.
They're not on roll anywhere.
They're not enroll anywhere.
Which, funnily enough, means that people who've ignored us for 2 years are ringing us up and saying, "What's Orly doing?
Yeah,
how can we help?" Which is amazing when they do.
I understand you have a ghost child in your house.
Exactly. Yeah. So our situation, there's so many parallels between, what I've seen of yours on social media. So Orly is late diagnosed, 16, has really not coped since secondary, was incredibly happy, incredibly successful in primary, massive sensory overwhelm as soon as we got to secondary, started developing pain, and so was in the chronic pain team, rheumatoid arthritis, which was then so chronic pain team, and then we got stuck because of lockdown, and then they started that again, and then they worked out right at the end of 6 months within the chronic pain team that the chronic pain is autistic masking. So then they said, we think Orly's autistic, but is like super masker. Mm-hmm. And was then diagnosed, but basically really hasn't coped in school since lockdown at all, and was on a much reduced timetable because we thought we were dealing with chronic pain, not dealing with autism. And then in the last 2 years, so they started refusing school in February 2022.
One, two must have been
during lockdown or after lockdown.
No, so just after lockdown, and they probably had like a handful of weeks.
Lockdown was the death knell.
Yeah. So they're super bright, the autism diagnosis hasn't said PDA, but there's definitely DA. There's not necessarily the P bit. So as long as it's Ollie's idea, it's fine. They are really burnt out, really struggling, massive issues with anxiety that's just become even worse. So that since March, they developed IBS. So they've already got avoidant restrictive food disorder, and they're very picky eater. And then to have IBS on top of that is just a blinking nightmare.
Yeah.
We've waited 30 months for CAMS. We've finally got to the head of CAMS. CAMS insisted on CBT. 2 weeks in, Ollie couldn't make it to an appointment. So we've seen a psychiatrist. We're 10 days into anti-anxiety meds, which of course Ollie's reacting to, and their IBS is worse. So we now have this draft EHCP, which is a load of bollocks, and so there's so many questions around, if your child literally can't even leave bed or feels that they can't leave bed, and you're being offered an EHCP that says attend this school, it feels like there's a massive gap. And we both know, and Ollie has articulated, that to have something in their life that means that they feel like there's some kind of purpose, because they're suicidal a lot of the time, would be great.
Okay.
They're a brilliant artist, and they've taught themselves the guitar since they left school, and they're quite good at that. So they're the kind of kid who can do anything if they put their mind to it, but they're just flattened, totally flattened.
Can I just fill in a couple of gaps?
Fill in the exam gap.
Will you take a breath now, because you make me feel anxious?
You did a brilliant job. I'm up to speed.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Brilliant.
It was amazing when I was kind of going. So, just so you have a complete picture, Ollie is also trans.
Yeah, non-binary.
Non-binary.
Yeah.
And is very, very clear that their life is unlikely to improve until they've had top surgery.
Okay.
And they've been saying this for quite some time, and it goes in kind of waves depending on the anxiety and the depression. And they identify much more with that community than they do with the autistic community.
They're not interested in the autistic community.
So they have interesting associations, So for example, when they were still at secondary school and we were first having discussions about support, the idea of having a classroom assistant or somebody to assist them with was just like, you have to be joking. Then I'm one of those kids. So there's all that going on.
Mm-hmm.
They've been, sadly not in the last few months, but before that, we're really quite assiduous in attending a fantastic LGBTQ plus youth group in Sheffield, and made a couple of friendships, and felt like this is my crowd.
Yeah.
So that's very positive, and again shows that often if they're feeling physically well enough, then if there's a motivation to go to something outside the house, they will get up, they will get dressed. It does mean the whole week was sort of pivoted towards that Thursday evening, everything, and nothing else could happen on that day, and so on and so forth. They haven't in recent months felt well enough to go, and also I think because of the age cut-offs, the people they'd most connected with, one of them anyway, has gone to uni. Has gone off to uni, that's right.
Right.
So we're also in a kind of holding pattern with that, although Sophie's just made contact with a wonderful therapist who's connected to the Gender GP clinic. But she has a private practice where she sees young people therapeutically. Do you want to just explain that really important distinction she made about when she sees the children, it isn't just about affirming the next step.
wondering what this has got to do with the A test.
I just wanted Heidi to have a whole picture before we go on to talk about these.
So Marianne came to talk to us at the parents group, trans parents group that we go to, and what she was talking about was offering counselling for a child so that when they go what she felt was that she was very often seeing children who thought that all their problems would be taken away the minute they had top surgery.
Yeah.
And she encourages counselling so that a child begins to understand that is able to talk about all the issues in their life and see which ones might be solved by that and which ones might be solved in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know Marianne. I've come across
Okay.
Marianne. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the context. And then the last bit of context is that the EHCP described by Sophie as crap.
I think she said absolute bollocks.
Oh, absolute bollocks. Very good, thank you.
Let's be precise here.
Just to sort of hone in on what that is they don't actually name a provision, a recommended provision. They just say we think further education college with the right support is going to be fine. But in their listing, which of course is taken from the educational psychologist report of what the issues are and the challenges are, there are all sorts of things like Orly may need initially months of one-to-one work at home to even begin to get back into this. None of that is represented in the proposed solutions. So when we got the draft with that form saying, 15 days to say yay or nay, we said nay, can we have a meeting? And we have that meeting with the SEND officer tomorrow.
Right.
So that is the full context for why today is so valuable.
Tiny bit else, which is that Orly would be the kind of kid who was getting GCSEs, is bright enough to get GCSEs, panics with exams. So Derbyshire have something called OOST, out of school tuition service. We can't find anything on any websites about EOTAS
In Derbyshire.
In Derbyshire, but OOST we battled for. They insisted on us trying Academy 21, which was also a load of bollocks. Orly ended up with a tutor, but they didn't offer a tutor until May, and they were trying to push Orly to do GCSEs that they hadn't been in a class for between May and June. And I said, I thought that was probably not very good for Orly's stress levels, but actually turning up and having some kind of engagement with a tutor would be a good thing. And so Orly did English and maths functional skills. And this tutor, basically told Orly a load of more bollocks, which was, oh, you'll get into college all right, your art's so brilliant, they'll just let you walk in, you're really bright, it's fine. And we've gone to a couple of the colleges this summer when Orly was feeling slightly better, and they were really clear that it's, you need GCSEs in order to get in. And we didn't have the...
Or you do them, if you get in and we let you anywhere near...
You have the extra sessions and you do them in your first year.
Yeah. And that's like...
And Orly's just not motivated in any way by doing exams or anything like that. So, yeah, I guess my question, because we've given you a lot of information, my question is, I'm imagining that EOTAS could be a kind of bridge between, and how do it having, you need to talk about Richard Griffin.
Okay, sorry, last bit of data.
Don't be sorry, it's all really helpful information. It's given me a really good understanding of where you're at.
Okay, so Orly was at this college called Hope Valley College, or was on roll at Hope Valley College. Head of SEN, very little support. Although he agreed when we withdrew Orly from school, he said,
we didn't withdraw Orly from school. When Orly stopped going to school.
When Orly stopped going to school, sorry. No, but we then had that kind of like, can we agree that this is not working and needs, and he said, yeah, absolutely agree, blah, blah, blah. And that led to the tutoring eventually. He got in touch the other day and said, could we have a word? I rang him and he said, they run a post-16 special needs provision, small, so they stop at 16 for mainstream.
It's for learning disabled young people.
And he rang and said, I've been sent your draft EHCP with a query as to whether we believe our post-16 can provide what Orly needs. So we talked about it. He agreed. I said, I don't think you are the solution. In the first instance, I just think we'll get Orly attending anything regularly, if at all.
Is it on the same site?
It's the same site, which
building.
Is definitely a plus.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a plus. It's a different building.
Right.
he said to me, a lot of parents of high functioning in terms of learning worry that, you know, their child is going to be surrounded by people who with profound learning difficulties. He said, just to say to you that this year we have a very interesting intake of young people who may not have been in school for 2 or 3 years, but absolutely are going to take several GCSEs at some point, are very alert and bright and quick-witted. And we've got children, you know, post 16 who are at primary school level. So it's a hugely varied year. He implied huge flexibility around attendance on the basis that he said, we're not inspected or judged for attendance or for exams. We would want to interrogate that more, because our experience of him as he's been all, you know, all fur coat and no knickers, that actually when you really talk about it, it kind of evaporates. And it's like, oh, did I ever say that?
I don't think I've ever heard that expression.
Oh, well.
All fur coat and no knickers.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a great expression.
It's good, isn't it?
On me.
Yeah. John Oliver used to accuse me of it.
You were all fur coat and no knickers.
Yeah. But he also, he said, the thing is, said, what I could imagine a scenario is that you might put us down as your kind of mainstream provider. And then you could also put down, so for example, there's a thing called Sparky Arts in Chesterfield, which is a art studio, animation studio, film studio, which exclusively works with post-16 young people on neurodiverse young people, which looks quite interesting. We haven't been able to be there yet. They haven't responded to emails. So he was sort of saying, look, you could anchor yourself here. So you're on the roll, but actually you, in your EHCP, what you'd have to fight for is the funding for additional, particularly arts-based elements.
It basically makes me really cross, because it means that they just get loads of money and all he gets less. But I might be being.
And then the crucial thing I said, in all honesty, given this transition from absolutely nothing, we are thinking about EOTAS. And he just said, well, let me just tell you that the new head of SEN for Derbyshire County Council has made it clear that they will oppose EOTAS at every single step. Now, I'm sure you hear this about every county, but he said he's new.
I have heard it about Derbyshire, though.
You have?
Specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
He said it's new, and it's a very strong message has gone round, and that it will be opposed. He said, of course, some things do go to tribunal, and they fight like cats, and then they have to concede some. He said, but, you know, this guy, I don't know, I haven't worked out who he is, I can't find his name on any system, has said our aim is to, you know, we want everybody in education and university.
On roll, yeah.
Yeah, on roll. So that's now, of course, I don't know how kind of how neutral a piece of data that was.
So it's whether to push for EOTAS or whether you can help us think through a way of asking for the things that Orly actually needs, which I think is Orly responds to people. So we had the only person who was useful for 2 years was the school attendance officer. And he used to laugh because we were the only people who invited him in, and he stayed for an hour and had a cuppa, and Orly was just like chat. Orly would get dressed for him. And he said, everyone else spits on my head. He was just the loveliest man.
It was gorgeous, and he revealed these amazing leg tattoos. So then they could talk about tattoos, and then he loves Marvel. So then they talked about Marvel because Orly's obsessed. Well, and
he brought Orly piles of comic books, and he was just a brilliant man.
We essentially want to adopt him as our caseworker, but
but someone like him, I could see begin to actually pull Orly out of the.
It's always recovery for our young people when they've been through what you've experienced, and what Orly's experienced is always about relationships. It's always about people. It's never really about, I mean, there is an element of the setting being right and the environment being right and the peer group being right, but on the understanding that it's always about the relationships, always. And you won't, that's what is often the barrier. You'll get really good transition plans from settings that on paper look like they would be excellent and they make absolute sense. But if there isn't a person that's going to be Orly's trusted adult during that process, they're going to struggle. Like it's.
And they're sitting in the EHCP, they're saying kind of 3 to 4 hours a week. And it's like, no way. You know, we will only be in 3 to 4 hours a week if that trusted adult is only available 3 to 4 hours a week.
Yeah.
I can't actually imagine
Yeah.
where they're going at all. So
Couple of things that before we kind of get into the detail of this, there's a couple of things that you said that I just thought I might say that I noticed and that I thought I should just share with you as terms of thoughts, and some of them are kind of from my own personal experience. The first thing is the thing about the top surgery thing. I don't know if you know, Theo had top surgery in June, and he also had that very kind of like laser sharp thinking of, until my top surgery is done, I really can't move on to anything. And I do absolutely agree with Marianne that there is value in helping a young person think beyond that, 100%, especially when they're not of the age when they could get top surgery. So it's about having them, holding them while they're waiting, in essence, and helping them to get their head around that. And we know that many neurodivergent people find waiting extremely difficult. Certainly that was the case for Theo. And whilst it isn't true that top surgery is the answer to everything, our experience has been that the moment that happened, a lot of things fell away for Theo and a lot of doors opened. So I don't want to say absolutely that's, I just kind of want to affirm you in that it's okay to be like, yeah, that makes total sense, because for many of our neurodivergent trans kids, that is true for them, and we know that kind of like, when you've got something in your head and you're fixed on it and it makes sense and you can't move past it, especially something that's a big thing around physical presentation for our trans and non-binary kids.
Yeah, because one of the big conversations we've had this summer is, I don't want to start anywhere new looking
we
like
had that. We had all of that. We had like Theo did go to college before his top surgery. But the thing that we did around that kind of like, he was male present, so he's trans, assigned female at birth, but mask presenting, and is a boy. But he was presenting as and passing as male before he started at college. We did a lot of work to make sure he wasn't dead named, he wasn't outed. It didn't always work, but we did all of that so that although we couldn't unlock the top surgery thing, all the other things were in place. So that's something to consider. How old is Orly?
16
and not currently using they them publicly and they him sort of privately.
Okay.
Has talked, I don't think this has been updated since they sort of said, I'm it's not a certainty that they're heading towards full male transition and presentation.
Yeah.
Do you think differently? Let's say if you think differently.
I do think differently. Okay. I do think that there's more of a sense of non-binary male presenting, that like they want top surgery and they want T, but talking about T, it's like, or maybe it's T for a short period of time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've got people in my life who are similar to that. I've got a very close person in my life who's trans, non-binary, and is on T, and kind of uses they him pronouns. I think it's kind of, sometimes in my experience, and it is only in my experience, and I'm not trans, but sometimes what I've seen from our young people is that the trans identity is actually as important as the presentation. So having that identity honored is as valuable. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Certainly when they don't have access to some of the things they want to access.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you said that I thought was really interesting was them relating more powerfully to LGBTQIA community than to autistic community. Theo also had that. That has shifted actually, but he definitely had that. And I think some of that is around when you're in school, the autistic kids don't look like our kids. Like, I don't mean don't look like, but don't present like our kids. Yeah. And then when they get into college and post 16, they realize that all the trans non-binary kids are autistic. So that's just a development that might come, like, I kind of just want to reassure you, I guess.
Yeah.
Well,
Forgive me if I'm telling you what you already know.
No, that's great.
and it's always useful to hear it again. So we joined the parents group for Say It, which is an LGBT group, and the only parents who come, their children are trans and their children are autistic. Actually, without, you know,
I think it's a perfect circle of a pie chart, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm open to being proved wrong, but I haven't met a trans person yet who is not neurodivergent. Yeah, to my knowledge. So just going to the EHCP thing, a couple of things. So you said it's a load of bollocks, and that's because they haven't translated what's in your reports into the EHCP. Would you say, is that because, or because the
my view is they've translated it, all goes across, and we've used your spreadsheet thing on the Marble Run, but I don't think they've really clearly articulated what the provision is.
Yes, it's the provision that doesn't match the stated needs. So they literally cut and paste almost everything the EdPsych has said. You know, Orly will need this one-to-one at home, very slow, very low sensory. They have chronic pain, but then in the end, the provision,
the detail of the provision isn't there. It's not specified.
No. Well, except it's that we, you know, it's simply, it's stated, but then at the bottom, whichever section it is where they go, this is the level of the award we're recommending. It just says, you know, £6,800 in a mainstream environment, left blank for the parents to recommend where we want it to be.
Yeah. Except
we've now had the old school come in and saying they've asked us if we can, you know, if we can meet all his needs. And we have yet to find anywhere that we think meets all his needs that can do the whole package. And anyway, we're minded to think that EOTAS, certainly in the short term, was the solution.
Well, is it EOTAS or is it asking for a personal budget? And I don't know if the two are the same.
I mean, yeah, no, they're not quite the same. Well, they're not the same. So in terms of definition, for you, you have a couple of options. Your EHCP draft would always not have something named in section I until it's finalized anyway. But the key difference between EOTAS, which is a bespoke personalized program based on section F of your plan, or a whatever it looks like plan that is managed by a provision, is what is in section I. So if in section I that setting is named, then they are ultimately responsible for the delivery of his EHCP.
Right.
If in section I it's left blank, then officially that child is an EOTAS child, and section F would need to be delivered through a personal budget, either paid to you or paid to providers, but it's ultimately overseen by the LA. And that's why LAs are really not keen to do it, because it makes more work for them.
Yeah.
And it leaves them open to much more in terms of litigation. And, you know, it's a ball ache for them, basically. You know, they have EHCPs, and then what they do is they find a school that can deliver that EHCP, and then they shift the duty of care to that school. That's the system.
So we could say yes to HVC. They've offered the place in Chesterfield, the Sparky Arts. I've been taking Orly to a ceramics tutor he's absolutely brilliant community ceramics guy. Orly hasn't been since March because they've not been well enough, but it could be that we name that. But again, I'm not sure, like, does he have to be registered as alternative provision in order to?
So that is when it comes down to the discretion of the setting.
Okay.
And it's about your relationship with them and how genuinely flexible they are willing to be. So from a legal standpoint, the setting that's named in section I are responsible for delivering what's in section F, which is your provision of his EHCP. And that is the beginning and the end of their legal responsibility. So what is in F, you can hold them to. But if it's not in F, it's at their discretion. And if it's not in F, and if it's provision that's elsewhere, so off-site, there would be a cost to the setting of that. And if they're on the banding of funding, this is not your problem, by the way, but I'm just so you know, if they're on the banding of funding, which is the entry level funding for an EHCP, which it sounds like they are, then they will be loath to spend more than that on Orly's provision. That being said, there are ways around that. The key really at this stage is to be looking at section F. What is in F currently in terms of provision? If you look at section F, do you think that looks like what Orly needs? And if it isn't, what's missing? And how do you evidence what is missing?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
So in section F, it indicates that Orly needs a key worker.
Yeah. Does it specify what that would look like, who that would be, to what level
No.
they would be trained, how many hours a week, whether that would be one-to-one?
No.
It says they'd be part of a daily meet and greet. So it clearly assumes that they're attached to a provider, mainstream provider, and therefore they're the person that, Orly meets first
They'd
thing.
be his trusted adult. And a key worker is always a good idea in a setting, but it's important to be able to look at what that actually says. What that's saying is there'll be someone in the setting that Orly has as their person, but it doesn't say that they'll be available to them full time. It doesn't say that they'll be, giving them support one-to-one. Not necessarily that's what Orly wants or needs, but it's about looking at the specification of that.
Okay.
And the school will go, yeah, we can do that. We can put on a piece of paper that this person is Orly's key worker. Of course we can. That's not hard to deliver on.
Yeah.
So you kind of got to be thinking, if you were the head teacher looking at this plan, would you go, yeah, can do all that, not going to get in trouble for not doing it? And you as parents look at that plan and think, if this is all he's getting, what is missing and how do we evidence that he needs it?
Okay.
So for me, say we talk about this key worker, my view is that key worker can be at Hope Valley College, marvellous, but Orly's not at Hope Valley College. So is there a way that we can make a request that key worker comes to meet Orly at home, work with them at home, get to know them at home, and eventually have a goal to end up in HVC?
What does section F say about transition planning? Did it say anything?
Well, so
transition planning.
So
do you want to talk me through what F says? Would that be helpful?
It says a targeted and individualized program of teaching should be implemented to develop Orly's functional skills, these to be overseen by a trusted teacher. This is likely to require one-on-one support at least 3 times 45 minutes per week, and this maybe need to be done at home for some time until a setting and personal confidence and resilience allows attendance.
Okay.
So that seems to me is our strongest way in.
Yes.
To say, look, the report actually says home provision is going to be required.
It says may. In your meeting tomorrow, push for having those changed. So it doesn't say may.
Okay.
It just says needs or will need, or does that make sense? So it's not open to interpretation.
Okay.
And just flag for them that it needs to be in line with code of practice, it needs to be specified and quantified. That's not specified. May is not specified. They'll say it's lifted straight out of the report. Ask them to go back to the EP and ask them to just be clear about it.
Okay. So it's for the EP to
their advice will be based on what the EP has written in their report. If the EP has said may, they will have lifted straight out word for word.
Okay.
But you can make a case to say this needs to be tightened up. Okay.
We thought the Ed Site was very good when he came. He really gave us time. As the first person who'd really, and
Orly came down and talked to him for an hour.
Yeah. So it's very positive. We're aware we never kind of wrote and just said thank you for, that means clearly it's his job, but we felt he did it with care. Is it politic if we talk to the officer tomorrow to write to him independently and say, we have made a request of the officer that she comes back to you to ask you to tighten up the maze and is that politic or is that bad behavior?
Don't worry about it, play dumb. Oh, we didn't realize that's not the way things are done. Okay. Why would we think that? They came to our house and we gave them a cup of tea and a biscuit.
All right.
They will say you should probably go through us, but there's nothing that makes, that's just kind of like etiquette rather than under control from the local authority. Was he an LA member of staff or was he a locum?
He was freelance because we lost you. We lost you.
Hear you.
Okay. He was freelance because Derbyshire is so far behind. He works in Liverpool, and Liverpool are up to date with their EP. And he said he's been working in Derbyshire for about 9 months because Derbyshire is so behind.
Yeah.
That's how much additional work there's been.
Yeah. Okay. So he might not be able to do anything unless Derbyshire say, yes, you can look at this again, because they'll have to pay him for his time.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's better to go to the officer.
I would go through the officer, and I would also go to him and say, just to let you know, we've asked for this.
It's the right time to write him a lovely thank you letter.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Because if he was LA staff, I would say ask them to bring him to the meeting. But if he isn't, they won't do that.
No.
Okay.
Okay, it says Orly requires skilled and knowledgeable staff who are experienced in providing a therapeutic setting for sensitive and vulnerable young people, which I guess is on offer. It will probably need to have a high staff to student ratio and be able to offer bespoke and highly differentiated curriculum and approaches.
So ditch the probably.
Yeah.
It's unnecessary. I don't think you need to even argue that. You can say to the local authority that word needs to come out. That doesn't mean anything. Yeah.
So then the key worker is indicated, but the key worker is indicated in school. So I think we can talk about I like transition planning. That's nice.
And then this is where it goes a bit pear-shaped. So Orly should be taught within an educational setting whose culture prioritizes growth mindset thinking and behaviors, celebrating positive learning behaviors. See the work of Carol Dweck for further guidance. I know why that's in there. He's responding to this sense of there is in there a bright mind desperate to be engaged. Yeah. And I think he's right. I think the educational psychologist is right. But it feels like our point is that's a wonderful thing to aspire to, but can we get real, at least in year one? That might creep back in 12-month time report or 2 years time report, but it ain't going to happen right now.
It also doesn't really say anything.
No.
A setting that has growth mindset embedded in it. Well, that's kind of every setting.
It should be, shouldn't it? Yeah.
But it does kind of point a little bit towards behaviorism.
Yeah, well, this was my concern. So the next bit, they talk about emotion coaching and talk about
those three,
both of which for me are like, that's just neurodiverse kids being taught how to behave as neurotypicals, which is more bollocks.
And is there any specification for the person that would be with?
You jumped to page 4.
I jumped to page.
Just turn.
Sorry. Thanks. I can turn my own page.
Yeah, the wrong page.
You're like a dream team, you two. I love it.
Orly requires attuned and trusted adults with knowledge of the difficulties of social communication, who will make themselves aware of their needs, both to enable them to express their feelings without feeling the need to mask, but also to advise on and model appropriate reciprocal interaction. Orly must have agency in this process and be able to control the pace and direction of the intervention. Talk to Orly about the world, introduce emotion coaching, and introduce regular communication intervention support. But it doesn't say who.
Or what.
Staff delivering this would benefit from support training in using emotion coaching. That's the only person spec, and it's completely
very woolly.
Yeah.
I mean, the advantage of it being woolly for us is that if it's woolly, it won't get done. So you kind of don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
Do you get me?
Yeah.
Like they're not going to bring a salt in because it's not specified, and so they can't ask for funding for it. So that is salt, speech and language therapist.
Okay.
Sorry. And like speech and language therapists are great, but they're not all created equal. So that's just another thing to think about if you're in that space. So I wouldn't worry too much about that as it stands, because it's not really deliverable. Do you know what I
Okay.
mean? It's not, it's kind of more about the culture of the school, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's not specified at all.
No. Okay.
It's a bit fluffy, but the bit about him having agency and control, that's really helpful, because
Yeah.
that's something that you can, if you're thinking ahead to, if things do not quite go to plan, you can point back to that. So if
Yeah.
it says in his HCP, he has to have agency, he has to take the lead.
And it said in the previous section, it says Orly doesn't respond well to pressure, timelines, or high demands, and these should be avoided.
Yeah.
Which I also think is probably going to be
Yeah,
important.
that's helpful.
I mean, the educational psychologist was really interesting. He said, I can't think of a single setting that would work for Orly, because Orly's super bright and needs super low demand environment.
There aren't settings. There aren't. They're sort of hodgepodge,
yeah,
bodged together jobs, usually small specialists that have become a place where the local authority know that the staff are there to deal with young people like our young people, or their medical needs provision PRUs,
okay,
which tend to get filled up with kids from like now until the end of the year, like October term to the end of the year, who can't go to school, who are hitting crisis.
yeah.
But there aren't provisions that are designed for young people like our young people, because the assumption is, and it's incorrect, the assumption is that if you have the level of support needs that our young people have around sensory issues and communication and regulation, that they would also have a learning disability, and that's not accurate.
Yeah.
And there are thousands of kids like our kids, but doesn't look like there's any plan to do anything about it in the meantime.
No, they haven't caught up at all. No.
Not at all. Just going back to the question that you asked about, I was aware that you asked about personal budget.
Yeah.
In terms of how that works. So at any point, you are entitled to ask for a personal budget. The personal budget, though, has to be linked to his outcomes. So I keep saying his, I'm sorry, their outcomes. And that's section I. No, it's not. It's section E of your plan. Sorry. And I would look at your outcomes and just work out whether you think that they are accurate for Orly or not.
Okay.
Because sometimes you'll get some real curveballs in there.
So, and the other thing I'm aware of is that this EHCP was written months and months and months ago.
Ages
Orly
ago.
was better, much weller than they are now. And so, like, what do we say to the SEND officer around, this is a child who can barely leave the house.
Yes.
And yet we're talking as if they're going to go to college.
Yes. Do you know what I would be minded to consider? And it's not necessarily based on what you're entitled to or what would be the legal thing to do, or, I mean, it's not illegal, but given that we know what we know about where Derbyshire are, where you are as a family, the fact you've potentially got a setting you could work with, I would be minded to look very sensibly at whether that setting could be an option as an interim. Having a setting named will work in your favour in terms of further evidencing what Orly needs or what doesn't work for them.
Okay.
You could potentially then go to appeal. It will take you at least 9 months to get an appeal date. So at least, most are coming back at 12 months now. But if you're in the appeal process, you have things like you could ask, for example, for a telephone case management call with the judge and ask them to make an interim order if things aren't working for Orly with them being on roll at the new school. If you get them on roll at the new setting and it's very clear very quickly that they're not going to be as flexible as they've made out, you have got options. You can, if they're not attending, there's a legal responsibility for the LA to make alternative provision. You've got like lots of options around considering, looking at a transition plan, evidencing what that could look like for Orly, showing that you've tried to work with a setting. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, I kind of feel like they could be throwing you a bit of a line by at least having an offer of a setting on the table. Do I think it's absolutely the right thing? Probably not. You probably do need EOTAS, but it sounds like you're not going to get it without appeal. So it's almost thinking about what's going to be the best thing in the interim period. Does that make sense?
So just to clarify, you're suggesting we say yeah, okay, we'll go with Hope Valley College.
I'm
And
not
then
telling you to do that. I'm saying I
no,
think
no, 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 no. You're
consideration
suggesting that that's something that we. It's all right.
I'm not telling you to do that. Just to be clear.
This is
On the,
recorded,
for the
just so you know.
replay, I didn't tell them what to do.
So we could make a decision to go for HVC. If they then don't meet all his needs, then we go to appeal.
You have an appeal window after your EHCP is finalised. You've got 2 months in which to go to mediation or request a mediation certificate. So you can contact the mediation service 2 calendar months from the date that you get your formal EHCP. Here's your final. Here's the letter saying you've got a final. And you can go to the mediation service and say, either we want mediation or we just want a mediation certificate to say we've refused mediation. And then from the date of that mediation certificate, you have another month to lodge your appeal. So you basically have 3 months from when your plan is finalised in which you can decide that you're going to appeal, so long as you get your mediation certificate before the end of the 2-month period. Does that make sense?
It does.
So you have got a bit of time and a bit of leeway to kind of think, okay, so in an ideal world, if we did let the setting take on his education, what would that look like? What else would Ollie need? What, the setting would be named as that setting. That would be what would be in section I. But it's then thinking about, okay, so if we know that they're not going to be in school full time, the expectation is that they're providing a full-time education. So you could make a case for, we know they're not going to be in school or in your setting full-time, but we do think that actually if you provided the opportunity for them to go to this alternative provision, they might be able to engage in that. And in the meantime, we need to have a conversation about a transition plan. What does that look like? Who's going to build those relationships? If you're taking on this EHCP, you're committing to those 3 45-minute sessions per week. Who's going to be that person?
Yeah.
So it's kind of, yeah, you're kind of doing a little bit of working it to fit Orly, knowing what you know about where Orly is now and where they might be and where Derbyshire are.
So my only concern about going to appeal, but like I'm caught between really wanting the right thing for Orly and also having had conversations with them around, I just want something. I want something to feel hopeful for, and the idea of being without friends, being without stimulation for another year makes them more suicidal. So and I don't know how to square that circle.
Well,
have you, sorry to interrupt, have you got anything in writing? Are they already working with Marianne?
No, we're in the process of making a first appointment.
Okay. And have you got any supporting evidence or anything in writing from some of the other alternative provisions that you've previously engaged with? So did you mention Sparks, or have you not engaged with that yet?
No, so the only thing Orly's done is guitar, and he's been absolutely amazing, but man, he's had to work hard. Online lesson. But he's absolutely adapted his practice, etc.
Yeah.
And the ceramics guy, but actually we haven't turned up when Orly's been feeling like rubbish. So
fair enough. And in terms of what it says about Orly's gender presentation in his EHCP, is that included anywhere?
No. Okay, that's good. Yeah,
I would include that in section A. I think in ours it says,
it says they them, doesn't it, in section A?
Well, it says they them, but it doesn't elaborate at all on kind of where we're at. It just refers to the pronouns and says,
okay,
all is referred to as they them throughout as requested.
Okay, it's a conversation to have with Orly, because you don't want to do that without their consent.
Yeah.
And for us in section A, it opened with, although assigned female at birth, Theo is trans masculine, has made a social transition, these pronouns should be used, and people working with him must honour those pronouns and his chosen name. And it might be worth having a chat with Ollie about whether that's worth having that in there, on the understanding that that is outing them.
they've wanted it in everything. They've wanted it in
Okay.
school stuff. They wanted it in the autism assessment. They absolutely insisted their correct pronouns were used all the way through. So I imagine
I think it's a good call, because the other thing as well is it makes sure that potential providers know what their status is, but it also gives you a little bit of something to play on if you need to. If a setting is named and they're just not up to scratch, you can play the whole, who in your team has got advanced training in supporting gender non-conforming children and young people? And that can slam doors shut fast for you if you needed to, because they freak out. And I don't mean that they should, but they do. But sometimes when you're trying to prove a setting can't meet need, that can be really helpful. You kind of have to. It's one of the small advantages we have, probably the only one. So I just maybe have a think about whether you can get that into section A, just as a one line, because then if you're thinking about forward planning this, let's say for argument's sake you do decide that this setting is right, and you can make a case, or you can make a case to Orly for having this time of, look, you'd have a place that's named and they would be responsible for working out what works for you, and we'll work with them on a transition plan, and maybe we'll look at alternative provision. And if that needs to be built on beyond them being in a setting or having a setting named, I'm thinking worst case scenario, it might be that goes really well. I've seen it work. But if for whatever reason that isn't working, you then are kind of setting out your stall in advance of, these are the things that's going to need to be included in Orly's provision, and we are going to need to make sure that we're making account for the fact that they're trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, and what that looks like in terms of the people working with them. Yeah. So it's just a little bit of waterproofing.
Right.
So can I just do one thing? So to do with this timing around appeals. So is there a place that says, we say, forget the appeal for the moment, but we say now in our negotiations about the current draft, we say we're happy to put, subject probably to visiting and actually talking to HVC, as the named provider, but we're going to make the case now for this additional provision at other places, for example, the art studio. So rather than waiting for getting into an appeal process to say, hang on a minute, we think this additional alternative provision should be funded, because what the guy at HVC said was, I cannot fund from what I would get as the named provider. Orly's also going and having sessions elsewhere. He said, but we have a successful model here of children who do get an award that allows for both.
Yeah.
So I'm just checking that I'm not hearing you say you're going to have to enter the appeal and potential tribunal process to even have that discussion. You could have the discussion now. If they said absolutely not, we're not interested in doing that, then we should immediately lodge the appeal, so that within the first 12-month period, we're having that conversation and potentially getting funding.
Yeah, two things. Your appeal can be based on sections B, which is need, section F, which is provision, and section I, which is setting. You can include social care and health, but let's just look at those three for now. You don't have to appeal all three sections. So you could appeal, for example, just one section. If you feel that section F is not fully specified and quantified when you get your final plan, you can say to Derbyshire, just so you know, we are going to appeal this because we want that plan tightening up, or we don't feel that needs have been properly outlined. One of the needs that you could state has not been properly outlined is the support around his gender identity. So you have options, and once you're in the appeal process, you can change the grounds of your appeal. So you could appeal, for example, section B, you could say his needs are not fully specified and quantified because actually we don't feel like we've got to the bottom of what is really going on for Orly. And because his needs aren't specified and quantified, his provision can't be. So we are going to appeal sections B and F. Then when you're in the appeal, if you have a named setting, you can say to the judge, we want to make an application to change the grounds of our appeal, and we want to open up section I because the setting isn't working either. So that's one thing. In terms of the alternative provision legally is made available to children and young people who cannot attend or cannot engage with formal education. And the legal test for that is it would be based on medical grounds because of all his presentation and their mental health.
And chronic pain, I think, having
And
read
their
all the
chronic
stuff
pain, yeah.
yeah,
And
that's actually listed on one of the medical reasons.
okay.
Yeah.
So then on that basis, if Ollie misses 6 days and it's apparent that they're going to miss 15 days, or they miss 15 days, as soon as that happens, so as soon as the setting is named and Ollie misses the equivalent of 12 sessions, which is a week, basically, that triggers section, I want to say 19 of the Education Act. I might be wrong. It's on the template in the Marble Run. Just check. But it triggers you being able to say to the local authority, this child or young person has missed 6 days of school, is likely to miss 15. You now have to put alternative provision in place. It's the LA's responsibility. They will go back to the school and say, you need to make alternative provision, but it's the LA's legal responsibility. And when you trigger that, that should give your setting the trigger that you need to go back to the LA and say, right, they've hit 6 days, they're going to hit 15, we're going to need AP, you're going to have to fund it. So you have that as a bit of a workaround.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Even if you can't get it in advance, because alternative provision is intended for children or young people who cannot attend.
Yeah.
Now we know that Ollie can't attend, but the setting might say until they aren't attending, we can't do anything. But as soon as they're not attending, which looks like it's going to be the case because they're not going to be able to attend full time, you will have that trigger. The one thing I would suggest that you do, and I'm sure I can tell that you're pretty robust anyway, but before you decide to have that setting named on Section I, just have a look at their inclusion and attendance policies and have a look at their behaviour policy. And just make sure there's nothing in there that's massive red flags for you.
Okay.
You are completely within your rights to say, no, we don't want that named. You can say, we don't think there's a setting, we don't want it named, we're going to appeal. But I just think that that might be an opportunity to get something for Ollie in the meantime, whilst you're working out what your next steps are.
Am I right in thinking we have to go through this dance once a year?
Every year. It's all the fun. But the advantage is they're 16. When you hit 18, it won't be an issue anymore. Because if they've got level, well, it depends. So Theo is actually he'll be 19 in 2 weeks. But on paper, he's a year behind, if that makes sense. So all the kids at the same age, same year group as him have finished their A levels and are off to uni this year, but he won't finish that level until next year. When's Ollie's birthday? When in the year? Okay, that's fine. So he'll be in a similar situation. So the only time it gets tricky is if you've got a kid who is an very early birthday and then their funding cuts off, but you won't have that because he's a February baby. He's not a baby, but you know what I mean. But yeah, he is a baby, of course he is. But if as soon as they've cleared, inverted commas, level 3, which is A level equivalent, their EHCP is likely to cease once they hit 18. That means that when they go to university, they won't have an EHCP unless they're still not at level 3 qualification. But you're then into the disabled student allowance and education support allowance. And from what I've heard, and you'll learn from me in the next few months, because that's what we're about to hit, it's a much more straightforward process because they're dealing with them as adults, not as children. So it's a much different feel and look. And although it's not as well funded, the higher education providers seem to be much better geared up in terms of supporting children who have different needs. So yes, you'll have an annual review.
Never getting to level 3 anything because they're so not interested in exams. But
you just don't know, though. You just don't know. Like there was a long time where it wasn't about what Theo was capable of, it was about what he could actually manage. And 3 years ago, I would never have imagined that he'd be saying to me, like he's literally saying to me now that he might move out of school, move out of home and go to university and live in halls. And he means it. And it looks possible.
Wow.
There's no way we thought that was possible 3 years ago. He didn't even have GCSE. So
very, very good to hear.
I'm not saying it's the same for everybody, you know, and
Yeah.
potentially if it's totally your call, and it's really all his call, you know, but there's no danger, no real danger in looking at whether this setting could work for you. You would still have options. And your options could be that you could appeal. Your option could also be that you deregister if you want to. You know, if it's just too much, you can go, stuff this. We're going to have some time to recoup. In terms of the personal budget bit, personal budget will only fund activity that is linked to their outcomes and that is specified in section F. So making a case for a personal budget for anything that isn't in section F is really tricky.
Okay.
If it's not been recommended by a professional.
Okay.
So my thinking is you might be minded to, that's my code for I'm telling you what to do, but I'm not allowed to, by the way, you've probably picked up on that. You might be minded, we'll cut that out of the recording. You might be minded to consider appealing anyway, just to tighten up section F for future proofing his plan. But you never know, you know, like you could get a cohort and a couple of members of staff at this setting that absolutely make that connection, and that could be the difference.
Yeah.
We just don't know what's going to happen, do we?
No.
But I would say that it sounds like they might be in a similar situation to where Theo was, where his mental health was not great, his fatigue was awful, but he was really bored and desperately lonely.
Yeah.
And so we made decisions based on that. You know, what's going to give him the best chance of not feeling so lonely and not being so bored? That's what we'll prioritize right now.
Yeah, and I really think for all his mental health, at least trying it is important.
Well, the very fact that when you mentioned it,
they didn't say no.
They didn't say no is the nearest thing we get to a yes.
They said,
Orlyland.
do you think Richard might be able to come in and see me?
The lovely.
Is Richard the inclusion person?
Yeah.
Are they still on staff?
They're still on staff, and he's so sweet. In July, he said, I actually don't want to stop coming round, so I'm going to leave you my comic books, and every time you finish one, let me know, and I'll pop around and collect it.
Oh,
he's just a sweetheart.
He sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Need more of them.
More Richards.
So I'm mindful of time. Wonderfully, we're going to see you again in 2 weeks.
Excellent.
So we will have had the send officer tomorrow. Depending on how that goes, we're going to talk to Hope Valley College, hoping to also independently anyway make contact with Sparky Arts, whatever they're called. What are they called?
Sparky Ink.
Sparky Ink.
Yeah.
And I know everything is on this endless 15-day cycle, 14-day cycle, but it feels like we'll know a lot more and be able to have a very useful part 2 with you.
Yeah. And what I did want to say to you was, if tomorrow things crop up and you want clarification, send an email to Jodie, use the password sausage, don't ask, and ask her for my phone number. And if you WhatsApp me, I will reply.
Thank you.
So yeah, because you're one of our unstoppables, I don't mind doing that for you, because this is kind of a key time and you might have questions. And I have my phone with me, and if you WhatsApp me, I will be able to voice note you back if that's accessible to you. If you've got questions, just do that. That's absolutely fine with me. I'd give you my phone number now, but I don't know it. But Jodie does.
What a brilliant idea. God, that's a really good idea.
But if you use the password sausage, she'll know that I've said that you can have my number.
Okay.
And then just WhatsApp me and say, it's us. We had the meeting. This is what happened. This is what we want to clarify. And I'll voice note you back, and I can support you that way. And then when we've got a meeting in another couple of weeks, we can go through it in more detail. But yeah, I'm happy to do that. No problem.
It's been so helpful. Thank you.
I really hope it has. And I've got everything crossed for you. And also to say, don't let them rush you. You've got a minimum of 15 days to feedback. They have got a statutory timescale by which they've got to issue your plan. That's 20 weeks from no, it's not. It's because you were appeal. It's 14 weeks from the date of the appeal, or of the date that they agreed to assess, if that makes sense.
Okay.
They could be outside of that. That's not your problem. Don't let
Yeah.
them rush you. Take as much time as you want. And also, don't let them kick it into the long grass and keep it in draft, because really, they have a legal responsibility, given that Orly is off roll and like, you have all kinds of grounds for complaint right on this. But right now, the priority is getting what Orly needs.
Okay.
Nothing else, discovering that they stop your child benefit, they stop your free prescriptions. It's a whole stitch up, all of it.
It is a stitch up. There are ways around it, all of that, but that's another conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me know how tomorrow goes, won't you? Pop me an
will.
email, and if you need a number, ask Jodie for it and she'll give it to you.
All right.
Thank you.
Good luck. I'll be thinking about you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.